a thing. Elon's putting a big bet on robo workers are going to be a new category, right? Draw that to 20 years. I could easily see robo worker maid in your house or cleaner, right?
All of his Mathematica software now built to like take these simple rules and generate physical laws that we can simulate gravity and quantum mechanics and everything that we sort of have observed in the universe.
There was this thing he said, I wrote this note. I died laughing about the climate change thing. He said Wolfram has this theory about how actually the entire everything is just all down to planetary computation. Being around people can also affect, like very toxic people can also affect like your well-being, which affects your stress, which affects your emotional well-being and stuff. And that could lead to some level of risk too. So maybe start there as a use case.
We say, oh, the next best thing for me to do is go, like eat some turkey in the fridge, right? We could actuate that and like go grab the turkey and chew it up and digest it and feed it to our bacteria in our stomach. And when Epistemic institution is asking that question, everything that we sort of have observed in the universe, he's got a theory for how that evolved.
Whoa, I need to look at this. That sounds next level. Hey everybody, welcome to ABCs for Building the Future. I have Jonathan, my co-founder on Epistemic, with me here today. And in this podcast, we talk about building in the open, and we bring on guests, people doing big things with big stories to tell, people interested in building the future, and maybe you are too. So join us. Today, we're going to be talking about two things. One is a really cool talk that will link in the show notes, and we're going to have a subsequent podcast to talk a little bit more in detail. At a high level, it goes through the evolution of technology at the intersection of science's perspective, and we'll layer in some of that of human evolution. And then how does that relate to AI? And then how does that relate to epistemic me? And we'll also go over a live backlog prioritization grooming session, and then we'll translate that into a shared aligned vision that we have for a demo for a deliverable in a week. So a couple things today. Cool. So, hey, Jonathan, do you want to talk about the artificialization of intelligence?
Yeah, in regards to the Benjamin Bratton talk, right? So this is interesting because I've been thinking about needing a word for this phenomenon in evolution, and I watched the speaker Benjamin Bratton talk, and let me find his exact words. The first time he introduced the concept, there was a slide that said agency preceded subjectivity. Subjectivity discovered its own agency by measuring how much it had artificialized its environment. And that's a lot to think about, what he might mean by that. But one thing he means by artificialization, or at least how I interpret it, is like think about human domestication. And like, we had wild wolves, and we had these cows and bison who were all wild, and we domesticated them. And in the process of that, went through natural selective breeding to create sort of an artificial version of the animal that suited our homeostatic needs as like a domesticated sapiens. And so you can think of like the cows that we have today that comprise all this biomass on the planet are just artificial cows. I think this is kind of like how he's intending to mean it, and that these cows can't exist outside of like the farms that we have them on and the fields that they would just not live. They wouldn't be sort of fit. They're artificial, and this dynamic happens in evolution quite often. In fact, I started to think like maybe this is the way we think about what's happening with AI and AGI going forward. Another example that's like really prescient is the eukaryote co-opt of mitochondria. Like hundreds of millions of years, we had these cells that would like basically kind of through endocytosis, they would allow other cells in their cell membrane, and some of them would have functional utility. And there are these like kind of, ancestors of the mitochondria, which eukaryotes had within their cells, that would have like this metabolic function of being able to break down, particles and, elements that had metabolic utility. And at some point, the eukaryote artificialized the mitochondria, and it embedded its own DNA into its DNA, and it produces the mitochondria as its own organelle within the cell. So this happens. So just like the cow and like our modern domesticated cow, is like the pre-eukaryote mitochondria to like the post-eukaryote mitochondria. And like the mitochondria has its own DNA sequence, ancestral DNA through the maternal mitochondrial DNA of humans, because it's so like distinct as its own. It wasn't invented. It was just like artificialized. So what a great word, right?
Could you talk a bit more about the AI analogy there? You touched on it a little bit before going to the
Yeah,
mitochondria.
well, you start to think about like how will AI evolve, right? And if you just kind of like, if you I don't know, draw the right boundaries around homeostatic forces and like how things kind of evolve over time. If you use something like assembly theory to look at like the befores and afters of, yeah, I've done this thought experiment. If you think that what AGI is basically kind of like this replicator of our economic value, like it'll study a human and then it'll like replicate its economic value and then it'll duplicate it like at 1 millionth of the cost. And so you don't need the human to do that thing anymore, right? Um, so in a sense, like the language models we built and the companies that are facilitating them are sort of artificializing they're using AGI to artificialize the economic value, economic agency that we all have as humans. Where does that leave us, right? Yeah. So I mean, and that's just like kind of stage one of how this thing evolved. I think Bratton took this like through multiple different stages in his talk. In other words, we could be like the pre-domesticated cows or the pre-domesticated mitochondria, as in the role that we play as knowledge workers and humans. Like that, if you think our governments and our large institutional organizations will all be like run by AI, then like they will artificialize all the economic value, and like there won't be, it can just create machines that provide economic value going forward, and like humans don't have to do that anymore. I mean, yeah, just
That should be a T-shirt. Actually, I love that.
it's the dog too, right?
I
Because
would-
there's the companion, like, but we're not
yeah,
wolves. We're not, and
yeah,
where with artificialization comes down to is like that there's some other actor creating an environment that where we can have complete agency, and still like the mitochondria can have complete agency and it can do everything it can from interoception and perception and actuation, that it
mhm,
was
mhm.
genetically like or sort of evolutionary like geared to do. It can express that agency, but it lives in a simulated environment. It's a little bit like we talked about the conversation about the Matrix yesterday. Like I think techno feudalism kind of describes like where we're at today. Like we got to get these artificial environments created for us that fulfill these kind of like underlying needs. Like flicking through TikTok, is going to be a dopamine burst that like kind of grabs our attention in such a way that it fulfills like a satiation, and we are independent acting agents, but we live within this bubble of a simulated reality, right? And now that simulated reality is going to get like even more sort of like purposeful. Yeah.
100%. Somebody just told me they rewatched The Matrix today and were like, actually,
Yeah.
wait,
Hold up.
it's so apt, right? It's so apt. Yeah. Did you have more thoughts on that? I liked how you connected the ideas of the cow, the domestication, the cow, artificialization of the human, mitochondria, tying that to evolution in general, and then how robo workers are a thing. Elon's putting a big bet on robo workers are going to be a new category, right? I think we just take the time slider, draw that to 20 years. I could easily see robo worker maid in your house or cleaner, right? Robo worker that cleans your floors. I mean, we have Roombas. Like we were trying. We've been trying. What do you think life will be like when we get to that? Like as a human, like what's my day to day as a
Yeah,
human?
the overall presentation by Bratton made me think that like what we with the Homo sapien kind of world that we live in today is just a very momentary flash glimpse in the evolutionary history that like we may become something different than we are today. The Earth will like you know I really liked how he talked about the way that what we talk about as climate change, as if we've broken something and something's wrong, is actually just the inevitable progression of computation and technology, blending with the Earth. So the Anthropocene is just like it's on its way to this thing called the new sphere, right? Which is just like a huge collective consciousness of human beings and all the things that we will become and all the things that we came from, all interacting together in this like computational world.
Dude, yeah. So there was this thing he said. I wrote this note. I died laughing about the climate change thing. He said Wolfram has this theory about how actually the entire everything is just uh, all down to planetary computation, and dark energy is the exhaust of heat. Time is just the refresh rates, and I was thinking hertz on a
Yeah.
monitor, right? Like And I'm like, that's actually beautiful. Like I could see that. I see what you mean. And the climate change, like you're saying, is just an inevitability of that planetary compute. Yeah, mind
Yeah.
blowing stuff. Mind blowing
Yeah.
stuff.
Have you ever listened to Wolfram talk about his physics before? Yeah, he's
No,
next
I
level,
haven't.
man. He's
What's it
really
like?
just been trying to derive physics
Yeah,
from the ground up in terms of these like cellular automata.
really.
Yeah.
What? I don't even know that word. I remember I took a lot of PChem and I took some quantum mechanics and stuff like that. That was years ago though. Then I went into software and I stopped thinking about that for a while. So it's kind of cool to think about these things again and see how far has academic thinking gotten. I'll have to add that Wolfram physics lectures.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you there's a really great talk last year where he compared his framework to Donald Hoffman, who wrote The Case Against Reality, and
Oh,
they basically decided that they're
okay.
saying the same thing for the most part, except for a couple little nuances, which was incredible. If you look at
Mhm.
the places the two people came from, like
Yeah.
Hoffman's a perceptual scientist, he's trying to deconstruct reality from a consciousness first point of view. Wolfram, he
Uh-huh.
released his book A New Kind of Science in like the mid 2000s. You know, like it just came from very different places. Both of them are like highly generative, like Hoffman saying like simple consciousness leads to complex consciousness, and Wolfram saying like simple behaviors lead to complex behaviors, and then they have all these kind of like theories of evolution in between and why they are what it looks like, and then just recently Wolfram released Wolfram Physics, where he's got all of his Mathematica software now built to like take these simple rules and generate physical laws that we can simulate gravity and quantum mechanics and everything that we sort of have observed in the universe. He's got a theory for how that evolved.
Cool. Whoa. I need to look at this. That sounds next level. Like that
Dude,
sounds so
you
next
would love
level.
Wolfram. This guy is he's such a hard worker.
Okay.
He's always filming himself.
Oh yeah.
He does work in public all the time. He's a huge longevity geek.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel
Yeah.
jealousy very often, but there's been sometimes when I'm watching Wolfram and listening to how talk about how he works, where I just like feel jealousy, and I'm like, this guy,
He talks about his
yeah, like
work,
how he
like
works,
how he
his level
works.
of energy, his level of cognition. He just doesn't turn off. Like just
Yeah.
he's just an incredible thinker,
Heck yeah. Cool. Okay. Sounds like somebody else to
right?
aspire to. Great. I will definitely listen to some of his talks. At the age of 15, began research in applied quantum field theory and particle physics and published scientific papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals. What?
Yeah,
At 15?
he's kind of next level. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's like that. Okay.
So, but it's funny. Like Bratton brought him up.
Uh,
He was actually making fun of his description of the universe. Like, yeah,
yeah, no, it was. I was like, "Oh, this must be that, like, academic sort of ribbing that I
right.
hear about that happens." That's kinda funny. Okay, I'm gonna look into him. Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't Yeah, I gotta get more, like, inculcated in this. Are there other people you would recommend I look into if I'm interested in this talk?
Wolfram. He talked with Hoffman. I mean, it's the same people we talk about usually. And that talk was on the
Okay.
Theories of Everything podcast, which is on YouTube.
Oh,
He does a
cool.
really good
Yeah,
job, and
okay.
he gets really good guests. And so I think that's good, like first level filter
Cool.
for big thinkers. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. There was, a really good quote in the talk that I loved that maybe we should talk about a little bit. Sciences are born when philosophy learns to ask the right questions. Philosophies are born when technologies force the birth of new languages. When that came up, how did you feel? What did you think?
Oh man, I was giddy. Like and then his specific phrasing, I like didn't have time to actually understand it fully what he meant in the moment. So I've had it on my list to kind of like pressure test it. I think one inflection point I always use as a stress test about like the philosophy and technology is the invention of grammar in 382 BC. It was at least labeled as
Mm,
grammar by Plato, and this was like after you had the Plato's Academy. So you had this new technology of written language, and you had enough sort of like philosopher free time that there was enough abundance and wealth from agricultural surpluses that you could have people like actually like in rooms together writing language for like enough time. And then what emerged out of it was grammar. And we didn't have grammar before
mm,
that. And then you like
yeah.
after grammar, there was about two more generations. Then you had Alexander the Great, where you had these hugely sophisticated supply chains and military tactics that were never seen before in ancient warfare. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that like philosophy was born out of the technology, out of writing, necessarily so. And did the questions before then lead to the technologies, lead to the sciences that was born? I hadn't thought about that way, so that's kind of an interesting thought experiment.
Totally. And then it goes, there's this slide he had about the scaffolding and how um, intelligence got to create symbolic language to further
Yeah,
intelligence. And then that grew to artificial intelligence, right? That we talked about. I think of it that way with the evolution of language. It's that we're growing the symbolic language that allows us to do more sense making. Like if we zoom out a little bit, that allows us to do more sense making. We can get more complicated discourse and debate and discussion, and obviously there from there innovations in what you said, like military tactical strategy or supply chains or whatever. And one thing that was really interesting from his lecture is he basically said in all of human history, it's always been a good period of time before you get these cascades back where the artificial intelligence has a feedback loop. We create these technologies or artificial intelligence from our sense making, the evolution of our symbolic language, and that feedback feeds back into the symbolic language and then the intelligence. A good example of this, I think he said something like, we were just monkeys creating fire
yeah,
from a rock or something. And that was like the first example of like, oh, fire, heat, warm, draw pictures on wall, symbolic language. Oh, now we could see on the wall because of fire. And that's what I mean by artificial intelligence. Fire creates symbolic language, talk, uh, and then that leads back into the feedback loop of we get more intelligent and then we keep doing that. And so he said one thing that I want your opinion on, which is for the first time in humanity, we're at this point where AI is accelerating really, really, really fast for anybody in the industry and watching the progress of day to day progress, even like the whole DeepSeek thing last week.
crazy.
Like it's crazy
Yeah,
how fast things are. And so humans are using these things to do sense making and to gain more intelligence. And it's a useful tool, artificial intelligence. But now at this point in time, it is a tool that is so good at sense making. It's better than anybody on the planet put together. Uh, Maybe an elaboration right now, but in the future, definitely not. Um, and it is going to help us create more symbolic language and then feed more intelligence. And then all of that is just getting shorter and shorter. So yeah, when he mentioned that, I'm kind of curious what came up for you there.
yeah. I mean, a lot of stuff. I think even what we call AI today was really just, um, it's just a reflection of the cumulative language spoken by people on the planet, right? I think it's an interpretation
Yeah.
and compression of like actual like lived experience where like we had language and we use these terms in certain context, and then so I just think it's a hall of mirrors the whole way through, right? And like in this and
Yeah.
this particularly reflection of all the spoken written language. Now we have a new technology and silicon where we have transformers that kind of make a reflection of it, and now we're in the process of the whole world like it's reflecting back onto how is it going to impact language now. And like, so I think we're in a phase now where it's just kind of like um, having language models with human existence where we're creating more media and language all the time is going to create like an evolved set of language patterns that we like use, and then those are then recompressed as LLMs and so on. And I think we're going through some cycles of that, which is really interesting in
Mhm.
itself. But it's just like it's a pattern
Yeah.
that is just it's ongoing.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? That's the interesting thing about it. It's cows all the way down or
Right?
bears all the way down. Yeah, on that, when you said the symbolic language thing, I mean, it totally makes sense. Like AI literally is something that we created that is trained from language and symbolic language to talk, like books and the internet and content, and that was a symbol or representation of people's lived experiences, perspectives, etc. And now it's just like all co-evolving really fast. So then, yeah, that begs the question, like that he kind of posed, which is, and I loved when you recommended me this. You were like, this guy said epistemic in the first like 5 minutes or whatever. You're gonna love it, and I was like, yep, sure enough, yeah, it happened. And then I was like, yep, I like it.
Epistemic institutions was his.
But
Yeah,
epistemic institutions. So I was actually going to say, he said a very kind of bold stance. He said our epistemic institutions aren't asking the right
yeah,
questions. Like we're in like a very do now, think later mode in science. And he's saying that we actually, that's a structural problem. And we need to, at this point, think more, do less, collectively overall was his sort of stance. So I'm kind of curious your take on that after you heard it.
Yeah, I think it's like a felt sense everybody has. Like you hear researchers talk about how they do grants to get money for their labs, and then to get real work done, they sort of like find some hack either within a grant or outside of a grant. Um, they know they're not asking the right question when they're writing the grant application. So the funding misalignment with like research is just evident, and it's a big problem. And so how do you fix that? And I think a label like epistemic institutions is like a really kind of cool progressive. I felt this in my own career. Like I didn't want to go into academia and have to like sort of just follow on to somebody's research that I didn't really believe on in order to like build up like pedigree, and then get frustrated and then leave and go to industry and then work for a similar kind of like trapped in a specialization where you're getting paid a lot of money, but you're not working on the right problems. Um, so how do any of us ask the right questions every day or work on the right problems every day is a question. It's like one of these things, like I don't know why we're not asking ourselves that all the time. And I think if we did, like that our political structures could sort of respond to it more. But I think a lot of us are sort of just kind of like beholden to the techno feudalism. Hey, I have a nice life and I have money for my family, and those are the things that we typically worry about. And it is a big luxury and an entitlement to be able to say like, I'm alive and I get to ask the right questions, right? So I think this is a unique period in time where like the epistemic next generation epistemic institutions is like needed for the first time in history, and it's needed more than ever right away.
Yeah, yeah, I really like um, the overall line of thinking that the symptom of people on the cutting edge not being able to ask the right questions is it's a symptom of the structure not being in place to allow them to do that. And what you kind of touched on is that the intersection of capitalism, we're all chasing paper, we all got to feed families and have shelter and stuff like that. Unless you're balling, you've beat capitalism, you could eject. Uh, Most of us are
Yeah.
still in that, so we can't exactly do that. But I think what he kind of showed is you can go find people that have ejected, that have a lot of wealth, that are interested in funding that kind of thing, and that's actually I from an entrepreneurial spirit front, I could see like, wow, this guy's had decades experience navigating academia grants. He was frustrated with it. He wasn't satisfied with status quo. So he created a new model where this kind of innovation could happen. And I really respected that about him.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I like that term, epistemic institution. I think that embodies not just, academic institutions, but institutions that cultivate an environment where you're asking the right questions. Like that's really it, right? And that could exist in private industry. And it's funny that you mentioned the whole paradigm of as an academic researcher in a typical academic institution, because of the incentive structure, I must constrain my question asking to hop on grant money where trends are to fund the question I actually want to work on. And so I've heard of all sorts of stories of like PhDs working like two PhDs, essentially kind of just like wanting to get their baby done, like the thing they really want to ask, but then having to navigate all these politics to get money to do another thing to like hopefully move the needle on their thing a little bit. And if you look at that and you zoom out, it's like, wait, we are just constraining literally the smartest people on the planet from asking the right questions. So like that's fundamentally wrong. Um, and going back to the philosophy thing, I think right now, tying it to we're at this point where intelligence, symbolic language, artificial intelligence, because super intelligence is being born, those are co-evolving so fast. It's necessary to get the best thinkers thinking about these things. Um, but we are constrained. So when I saw that, because we ourselves we're thinking about like, okay, how can we appeal to the ICP of the philosophically values aligned kind of technical contributor or researcher or scientist or practitioner around the, I guess, human expertise fields of like philosophy, neuroscience, like
Hmm.
metaphysics, all those, and like technical contributors. So we even have this problem of like, it'd be sick if we could keep exploring this problem, these questions. If how will AI understand us if we don't fully understand ourselves? Like, can we keep asking that? And that's going to take a lot. And so one of the things I'd love your opinion on, like I've been thinking about that a lot and figuring out what's going to be the model that takes us forward. I think obviously, go hard at Brian AI right now, and that is our best go to market motion right now. But thinking bigger picture, what does the monetization actually look like when we land the next client and the next one? And how does that look like in terms of funneling contributions to the open source project, making sure that grows at a healthy evolutionary track, and then making sure we could like sustain this. I've been thinking about that a lot, and it was so cool that this guy actually just made it happen. Like he was like, no structure exists. I'm gonna go make a structure where we can do this. Um, so I just thought that was so cool. What do you think of all that? I know I said a lot.
Yeah, and I guess I forget the organization that funds his program. I think it's called the Berggruen Institute. So I was thinking that during his
Yeah,
pitch, he must have had made a very good impact on this institute, known people that where they really gained trust, so that he got enough like
yeah,
liberty to create the anti Cytheria institution group. So if you talk about epistemic institutions and like what they should be, is I think our institutions should be able to ontologize existential risk, in the same way we think about longevity, but also at a societal level, and make sure that we're the right questions being like, what is the knowledge we need to gain in order to like protect our society from existential threat, in order to like continue to grow and flourish through evolutionary cycles, and be able to sort of like not just see what's on the horizon, but see what change looks like, and like what kind of questions should we ask today, so that and then put financing into that. And I think like one of the ways that you do that, like how do you understand like what matters within a population, for instance? I think that's where it comes back to representation systems. And if you have representation systems
yeah.
and values that are well understood within those representation systems, and you think about how dumb it is right now, or like I mean, we can't take for granted democracy, but like just at the pace that it moves relative to existential threat, like that we go to the ballot at a certain like once a year, once every 4 years, cast a vote on things that everybody knows we're not asking the right question when we cast votes. Like everybody knows it.
Well, I guess I should say everyone. It's not 100%. There are brainwashed people deep in the matrix that think they know, and so they think
Yeah.
they're right.
Uh,
You know, but in
Most
general,
everybody,
yes,
everybody that I
I think
talk
there's
to
a
and you
bad.
talk to probably is like got this feeling that my vote isn't voting even for the right thing. It doesn't matter, right?
No, it's
Yeah.
a sham. Yeah, it's a sham.
But then if you took it, if imagine that like all of us are asking the right question all the time, all of our needs are represented within like all the homeostatic processes in our body, our supply chains all have representation, and all of this is being fed back into an epistemic institution in real time basis that can make sense of it and then like prioritize what are the right questions to ask. That's what like a next generation epistemic institution looks like to me. And so this is a collective intelligence, and I got so interested in like what examples of collective intelligence look like. I studied the transition from unicellular animals into multicellular through the basal ganglia specifically. And if you look at how the basal ganglia works in our body, it started out, and it pretty much still is, a representation system for all the homeostatic needs, of our cells and our tissues and our organs, right? And so it's I think that there's evolutionary precedents for like what an epistemic institution could look like at that scale.
Yeah, like just from that, because we always take this hypothesis that we're all just agents, we're made up of agents and collections of cells, right? And so just from that example, you're saying there's obviously like kind of parallels at a bigger organization or collective level. Am
Right,
I getting
right.
that right?
And I think a, a
Yeah.
sophisticated representation system sort of starts to look like a superorganism in a lot of ways, where it has its own agency and its own like sort of sense-making apparatuses. It can ontologize, understand existential risk, and then like
Yeah.
understand what's the next best question to ask, and what resources should I actuate in my environment to do that. And
Hmm.
when we ask those questions,
Yeah.
and we say, "Oh, the next best thing for me to do is go, like eat some turkey in the fridge," right? We can actuate that and like go grab the turkey and chew it up and digest it and feed it to our bacteria in our stomach. And when an epistemic
Yeah.
institution is asking that question, it can allocate financing, and it can create training programs, and it can like it's the same sort of actuation to solve the next best question. It just has it understands what is universally needed in order to make it happen.
It's a different implementation, but essentially it's the same thing. I need to make sense of this to make a decision. I need to ask the next best question to make sense of it to
Yeah.
make a decision to actuate either from a collect like us, that organism, the
Uh-huh.
ganglia. What
The
was it
basal
called?
ganglia.
The
Yeah, it's the
ganglia,
oldest part of our brain. Yeah.
basal ganglia. Yes. Versus like okay, just take a different uh, collective epistemic institution is just different. Deploy capital makes sense. Actuate versus like, yo, I'm in this body. getting, sensors or data inside this body. Okay, activate. It's a little different, but like essentially overall, it is the process. Um, let's do a little exercise. I think this is fun to dream up what does the next generation epistemic institution in the future look like. So now we have like some anchored thoughts around how this guy did it, and then you just gave us a little nugget, which is like envisioning a world where real time we're getting data tracked at every cell, organism, agent, person, human on the planet, and then we could feed that some way in real time to some data set back to an epistemic institution where they could review that, hopefully have like context of that in different almost verticals, like the different
Mhm.
sciences departments. I guess if you could think about it from an academic institution perspective, departments. So there's obviously AI in that. There's obviously, I'm thinking there's a lot of requirements there, but like without getting into the, uh, implementation too much, what other things could we do to like really shorten that feedback loop slash make it even more accurate slash make the sense making of it faster and more accurate?
Yeah.
You know,
Should we come
that's how
up
I'm
with
thinking.
an example of like what this institution is is tasked with? Is it?
Yeah, let's use the longevity case because we're
Yeah.
literally working on it, and I see a path there, right? So starting with Brian AI, let's say he gets 1 million members by end of year using it and collecting health wearable data, and a non-significant population of that population, subpopulation of that population, contributing biomarker data, other demographic data like gender, where you're from, and then using epistemic me, we contextualize a lot of belief system data too against those things. So let's use that as the use case. And then the epistemic institution, do you want to pick what their goal might be from
Yeah, I
that?
think that's a great example. I think maybe just say protecting a certain population of humans from existential threat through a health lens. I think it's a good thought
Yeah.
experiment.
All right. So, okay. So now we got a little bit of
Yeah,
guardrails. How are you thinking about
yeah. I
this?
think okay. Let's say we have um, let's call it like 50,000 humans. And then we have an AI that is meant to like aggregate everybody's needs and sort of like it's the accumulation of the people and all the biology that's within that organization plus the AI but the AI will automatically like weight everybody's input and then come up with like the next best question to ask and like determine what's the next action that should be taken. So I think kind of like in political structure um, in that sense.
Hmm.
And then I think about like, well, okay, what data do we put in? You mentioned biomarkers, right? Um, I think we're really like taking a self model of every human and breaking it down to like all the homeostatic functions that we need. Like we talked about hearts and lungs and blood and muscles and at sort of a higher level. And then below that, I think you have all kinds of cellular interactions, and you can imagine that like each individual person could be represented by say like 100,000 self agents that are all communicating data about their homeostatic needs to survive. Um, you know,
Yeah.
and so you want if you have cancer cells in your body, they are part of this representation system that is saying like hey, I'm a threat, or these cancer cells are a threat to me, or something like that, right? Um, and so
Yeah.
then you're going to bubble all those things up to a set where like what the AI is going to be looking at is kind of like these intersubjective representations of all of the agent beings within its representation network. And remember, if you have 100,000 per one person, there's 50,000 people. You have millions and millions, like maybe that billions of representatives that you need to account for.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Yeah.
then you're going to take, like simulated realities, and you're going to have to understand the environment in which each of these independent agent actors works in. And if you make changes to the environment, what is going to be the outcome of that? So this AI is going to
Mhm.
need to run sophisticated simulations across this population set, and then it will understand like, do we need to take immediate action, such as like cleaning the air that these people live in, or do we need to take longer term actions, such as researching interventions that are pharmaceutical? Um, and I
Yes.
think that the common thread with all of them is sort of metabolic. Like, uh, if you can
Mm.
understand that holistically, we can keep healthy metabolism amongst this group of like 5 billion representatives in my agent system, and then I can weight which metabolism sort of like is the most important for survivability of the entirety, then I think you've got like a an epistemic institution that's working on top of a representation system that is holistically sort of like a consciously agent actor, works towards group survivability.
Okay, so just to piece together what I'm understanding, to solve that problem, we would need to allow the epistemic institution to be able to ask the right questions and get the right answers 100% of the time really fast in real time. So that means that there's a requirement of allowing them to run simple to highly complicated simulations on target population and have sufficient data for that to have pretty much 100% efficacy of representing that target population in the real world. Did I get that right? Like that's the overall thing that's like
Yeah, that's a good
required, and
synopsis.
like that's the
Yeah, yeah.
foundational thing that's required, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
it gets complex in the details because just like our individual sense
So
making, yeah, you
yeah,
have
I was just thinking, how do we break this? Like let's make it more complicated. So let's say like, so we only were looking at metabolic health. So now let's say, because the bigger question is existential risk. So expanding scope a little bit. Instead of metabolic health, maybe it's on a micro scale, smaller scale. Like a bigger scale would be like, how do we incorporate maybe the fact that nations are still waging war,
yeah,
and some of these populations live in a war zone. So that's one use case I just had in my brain. A further off use case is like, shit, what if there's a meteor coming? Like, or there's something unknown coming that
right.
might hit us, right? So that begets the requirement of, oh, okay, we got to have sensors up the wazoo in the universe, like somehow. But micro interaction to break the model, and then let's evolve it. This is a fun thought experiment. Is being around people can also affect, like very toxic people can also affect like your well-being, which affects your stress, which affects your emotional well-being and stuff, and that could lead to some level of risk too. So maybe start there as a use case, then we evolve into the maybe you're in a war zone, then evolve into the meteor use case. How might we take
Yeah,
that into account?
I think it starts to look a little like the needs of a nation state, right? Where like, you know,
Yeah,
because you need to,
yeah,
well, if we need to maintain the metabolic health of all these 5 billion agents, then like let's make sure that we have nutrient supply chains that are like well stocked, not just for today and tomorrow, but for like weeks or months in the future. And like one interesting heuristic is like how long could a country survive today if it's like shipping channels were cut off? And I think in like Taiwan, you might have like 30 to
um,
60 days worth of food or something like that. So this is something that like
wow,
an epistemic institution that's acting for health purposes would want to like extend out pretty far. But then on the other side of that, I think you have you have actuation of knowledge work and physical labor that like you need your population,
yeah,
the aggregate metabolic sort of energy to be applied to, so to like act on the actuation of the system. Um, and so you're going to want to
okay,
be taking measures to protect and make sure that people are in psychological conditions and like working conditions that they're safe and they're able to perform tasks according to the benefit of all. Assuming
mhm,
that they're actually responsible for keeping like we're taking internal resources to like evolve
yeah,
health needs, right? Um, so I would start there, like from the
totally.
bottom up, like metabolic supply chains, and from the top down, like real knowledge work and physical labor and productivity gains economically. And that starts to look a lot like a nation state, at least as I picture it.
So then to solve the war problem, it'd be model a bunch of nation states that reflect our
Yeah,
reality.
because I think that's what happens is that you have a bunch of these actors, and there's like limited resources for metabolic health of their organizations, right? So then,
But that's literally life
yeah,
right now. Yeah. I mean, there's ego and pride and narcissism thrown in the mix, but like, yes,
those are
that's
just
life
helpful
right now.
tools to like to solve the underlying resource dependency or constraint. Um, and that's why I think like
Yeah.
having abundant energy is one of the things that unlocks. So now you don't have to optimize these epistemic institutions to like be militaristic. Um, or at least like I think boundary systems is something that all homeostatic life has. And if you don't have to allocate all your energy towards like gaining new ground, taking new territory
Yeah.
for resources for your survival, then you can put it more
Cool.
into the epistemic knowledge work of your system and do more research to like reduce uh, other existential threats.
Yeah. If we don't got to worry about the lower level Maslow's hierarchy of needs, yeah, then like it opens up the mind more back to a parallel thing we were saying, it just allows more people to be asking the right questions and try to solve those things
Yeah.
collectively. And the accumulation of that knowledge work over time, I think, in your words, will help the system actuate in the quote next best way or right way. Okay, now what about the meteor thing? Is that in my mind, I'm like, all right, we really can't fuck with that. Like, we probably need somebody to go figure out how do we even sense things that are. We could sense things that are, I think, hundreds of
Mhm.
light years away. But then some of the problems are like the image processing, image quality, and like speed to get image. So then maybe this epistemic institution has to evolve its scope and be like, well, we're going after that
Yeah.
now to get to even get the right data to make sense of it.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think that's a
Totally.
foundational requirement?
By the way,
That's
did
where
you
my
see
head's at.
that headline that the risk of an asteroid hitting Earth, and this was a particular asteroid, they increased the risk from like 0.2% to like 1.6% yesterday or something like that. Yeah, it was
What?
in my news headline.
Wait, what? Wait, there's a more than 1 in 100 chance that we're just gonna get hit by a meteor? How
Oh,
big
it's
is
like
this
180
meteor?
miles wide or something like that. It's huge. Yeah,
What? Oh shit. That would be like like a fifth of California. Like, hang on, that's a lot.
it'd be an
How
impact.
many? What's the square mileage of California? This is also funny. I just asked AI because in the past I would have had to go figure out the square mileage of California and then do some calculations, conversions. AI just did that for me
Yeah,
in real time. We are showing Benjamin's model is correct. I am making sense now from the artificial intelligence, and I'm evolving my own intelligence to evolve the language that I can use
beautiful.
in this podcast. California has a total of 163,000 ish square miles.
With like
180.
180 miles
Yeah, I mean
wide,
that's.
yeah.
I mean that. Yeah. So then it's 180 by 180, right?
And
So
I just look up the article.
yeah, that's a lot. 32,000. 32,000. Oh, that is about a fifth. Wow. Thank you, math teachers from the past, for giving and engineering teachers from the past give me some level of good estimation. I'm kind of proud of that. Sick.
Wait,
Wait, that's almost actually on the dot, 1/5 exactly, like, almost. Cool.
oh,
Um,
so it's only 130
alright,
feet
wait.
to 330 feet long, the asteroid.
Oh, okay, okay. There's 180 miles, bro. Like, that's wait, 130
Yeah, and
feet?
it's 1.3% chance of risk, and it's 2032 where it would have potential impact.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better because 130 feet, I could better imagine that. That's like
It's a building.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's like a building. I'm just thinking about my apartment square feet. Okay, cool. I don't think we're gonna die
Yeah.
from that one,
Mm.
homies.
It'd be like a
Yes,
giant
we got
ship, like
this.
a
We just
yeah, shipping tanker.
cool. Sorry to scare everybody on the pod. We're gonna
Yeah,
be all right.
but it's like
Um,
a flight or
sorry, go ahead.
flight kind of trade-off, right? Like where from a sense-making perspective, there's all these things that we need to be doing at a higher level cognition-wise, like finding food, mates. In our world, it's knowledge work. Um, and then all of a sudden, there's an asteroid
Yeah,
coming at you, and like nothing else matters, right? Um, or if it's a
yeah,
tiger or whatever, and so then it just shortcuts
totally.
epistemic capability, and you have to have sort of like pre-programmed routines in your survivability history, things that your ancestors had already
Yeah,
solved to figure out this problem that you're relying on. ChatGPT won't help you
yeah.
with the tiger in front of your face.
ChatGPT,
Yeah,
no, but
it
maybe in the
might. Yeah, if
future.
it can, and that was like what you're talking about, the back propagation of evolution, right? Like
Yeah,
if we get our AI plugged into the sensory loops that happen at like the reflex level of our nervous system, say 50
yeah,
milliseconds and below, um, like
yeah.
that can absolutely be like an adaptation that could evolve. Years of evolution have taught us that we've now figured out like how to back propagate even more knowledge into that system.
Definitely. And as you say that, I mean, there's also the other take that humans and AI evolve in this hybrid way together. Um, so, like one example, I always think about what's that boat where if we replace every part of the boat, is it still the
Mm,
boat? There's some boat. I forget. There's that
yeah.
philosophical problem. I forget. I'll add it to the show notes. Um, and so one of the things, as I'm listening to Life Force, the book by Tony Robbins featuring Peter Diamandis, is there's all these like therapies going on, and one wonders. if you replace every part of the human body with some synthetic part, uh, you're something new, right? Like you're not Homo sapien anymore. Like I'd imagine, and especially if you tie it into literally like this has instantaneous
Hmm.
reflex level feedback loops to your brain to do things with you, sense making, actuating, then you've become
Yeah.
something different. Yeah, well, I'm sure you've thought about this. So, do you have any evolved thoughts on that, or additional thoughts on that?
It
I should
reminds
say.
me of my the consciousness complexity index. Like where it
Yeah.
like if you hold agency for what it is that makes you conscious, then and you don't like reduce in complexity from that, and in fact you increase in complexity from it, then that seems largely value directed if you have sort of like an evolutionary lens on life.
Hmm.
And yeah, you could
Hmm.
replace yourself piece by piece, um, but what what can't be replaced is the ongoing conscious loop of consciousness, sense making, and agency that you have between yourself and your environment. And that's where like you could easily just kill somebody and create something different in the process of replacing them piece by piece,
Yeah,
or you could have a measure.
for
And I think
sure.
that measure, the consciousness complexity index, where like you really have like a mutual information score of all the interoceptive and exteroceptive processes that are going on, what the environment is, how we control it, what the complexity of the environment, how many objects we can manage at a time, what's in our interception, how complex internally can we respond to our environment. Like if you can maintain that, then you can evolve it.
It's like the complexity, that factor is essentially like a weighing factor to balance, right?
Yeah.
In this kind of complicated web of systems. For the audience that hasn't heard about Jonathan's CCI, could you talk about that? And you touched on a little bit about interoceptive, exteroceptive sense making, feedback loops, but can you just talk about like a little bit of the origin of why you came up with it, and then what problem does it solve to
Yeah.
you,
It's
just for the audience?
it's interesting because I was watching this Bratton presentation. He was starting to get on topics of evolution, and I've been working on this idea about an assembly theory of consciousness. And then he introduced
Yeah,
assembly theory into this presentation, which so was just like I was there. I was like, this is awesome.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and okay, so the assembly theory of consciousness, it was a problem solved. Like imagine you have data from a distant solar system through a telescope, and you have like pixels with colors on them and stuff like this, and you're trying to understand like what molecules might be on a planet in this distant solar system. And so there was a guy that was his job, was like figure out questions like that for NASA. And he like
yeah,
realized there's this inherent relationship with chemical particles that like the more complex they are, the more interactions they have gone through. And so he likened that to the process of evolution, like to say like that each individual interaction was sort of like an evolutionary step or turn in its evolutionary
yeah,
cycle.
yeah,
And that the more complex the molecule, the more ancient it must be, the more complex it must be, the more evolutionary cycles it must have gone through. And so he came up with a formal like he calls it the assembly theory, and it's about how particles are assembled in a chemical from a chemical uh, you know scientist, and but it
interesting.
applies to then how biology happens, right? Like because it's really the same kind of
Yeah,
mechanisms. And this is something that I like. I just love to study evolution because in the sense that it's our history, and I really like kind of
yeah,
spend a lot of time reading the historical narratives of how these, especially breakthrough evolutions, have happened. Um, and I saw the same thing. It's just like there's always like it's not that evolution goes linearly through these more complex adaptations. It's just that like you tend to get um, additive adaptations that like find fitness like with more complexity, and sometimes you get more complexity that doesn't find fitness, but the more complexity gets passed on, gets integrated, and so on. So anyway, I like that theory.
mhm,
And I just thought like I was trying to talk about Michael Levin's work and like how to explain, because Levin's work has to do with like cellular biology and how cells like have ion channels that form bioelectric fields that can like build our tissue systems and our embryonic process. And I was in a forum where somebody was talking about, well, his theories really don't approach how stem cell drift happens, as in like the stem cells in our body have actual epigenetic and genetic drift over time, which is intracellular.
yeah,
And I thought, like, I think
yeah,
Levin's philosophy actually talks about this. His science doesn't as much, but his philosophy does, because It's like about how things assemble. And so I thought, how can I articulate this in a
Mm.
way that, like, we can see this? And I kind of, went on ChatGPT and created this theory about the assembly theories of consciousness. And it was fun because I just, like, you wouldn't ever ask a human being to do this, but I was like, I need a theory that explains all of conscious life through history and how everything evolved and how everything's ancestors are defined. And I just listed out these absolutely crazy, and I said, these are acceptance criteria. And it's,
Here you
yeah,
go, intern.
figure
Figure
it
it
out.
out, intern.
And it says, okay, here's the assembly theory of consciousness. And it, like, basically said, I've solved all your acceptance criteria. And here's a Python script that demonstrates, like, this, how things evolve. And it made it noted, like, this is not an empirical model. This is just a thought experiment. But, like, for like,
Yeah,
30 minutes of work on my half, like, that was pretty good.
yeah,
Um, and out of it came this
for
idea of
sure.
the consciousness complexity index, which is like, so assembly theory has a complexity index. And so I just applied that to, like, agency, to say, like,
Yeah,
and as you know, I just have enough background in thinking about agency, subjectivity, and consciousness to have a
yeah.
mathematical model, to say, like, I think this is calculatable.
What's that math model look like?
Well,
Like in assembly theory, I'm not
oh, the
familiar.
assembly theory. Um, oh, there's
Yeah. How
Well,
do they
there's
come up
basically
with that?
just like, like, it's an information theoretic number. I forget exactly the math that's used, but it just says that, like, here's the complexity of the molecule of water. Here's the complexity of the molecule of the element of oxygen. Um, and, like, you can get a
Okay.
number, and one's higher than the other.
And so he's coming at it from. So I'm really intrigued because I have a chemical engineering background. So I used to love thinking about chemistry all the time. So it made me think about the analogy of a tree. We cut it, we see the middle, we could read its history, right? But this is like the lowest level tiny tree you have inside you, the
Yeah.
molecular level, right? I mean, there's an even lower level, but like at this level is quite sufficient, I think, for this theory. So just to get my thinking straight, is that every element and molecular compound has a different number, or is it also the actual matter, like not just the compound in terms of theory, like on the periodic table, or in organic chemistry problems and equations, but is it actually like, let's say, for example, um, I don't know, like even this piece of paper has like some carbon, right?
Uh-huh.
I've written on it, and now that carbon's changed in some way. It's been interacted. There's been some abrasion, right? Its molecular structure has changed a little bit. So does this theory account for that change? Is that what
The
you're saying?
assembly theory.
Yeah,
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 I think
yeah.
I think so. I don't know exactly how it sort of, like, categorized the
Okay,
ink on the piece of paper, if that would be its own sort of, like, metamolecule or whatever, but,
okay.
that's the idea.
But it's something
Yeah,
in
something
that
in that direction.
direction, though, of like matter is changed or aged or something, and at a molecular level, we can actually attribute a level of change, and that's kind of assembly theory or the
Yeah,
complexity of
and
that.
even an example you gave,
Okay.
like, where'd that, paper come from? It grew from
Yeah.
a tree,
Yeah.
and how did the tree get there? And like, it's got its own history. But then, so every single sort of
Yeah.
step where the molecule gets more complex, is just, part of the assembly process of. And then the last example you gave was, like,
Oh.
putting ink onto the piece of paper. It's
Yeah.
just like, that's the end of the process for right now, right?
Oh, you well, is it? Because now it's in my mind, what I've written down, it
Right.
made sense of at an even lower level, maybe not, right? Because like there was something that happened uh in my brain in terms of molecules and shit when I wrote on the thing and made sense of the lecture, right? So you one could argue like there's some transitive property there.
Yeah. And that's, like, I don't think the
That's
assembly
cool.
theory directly would approach that, but, like, that's why I think you need assembly theory of consciousness, is just, like, because
Yeah.
there is this world consciousness kind of relationship that is, like I say, it's a hall of mirrors. Like, the more you look at it, the more it's just like, it's continual, like,
Yeah.
reflection back and forth of, like, world and self.
You know, I always think about that first picture you showed me when we met. It's just that human mind and the earth and the perception loop with the disruption in the
Oh, yeah.
middle and the beliefs. I literally think about that shit all the time now, like
Yeah.
all the time. It just pops up in my head. Yeah, it's really good.
That
Um,
was,
it's on our GitHub for people that are wondering what it is. Just go to our docs. It's
oh,
like one
yeah.
of the first images. So thanks for explaining the consciousness complexity index. Was that it? Consciousness complexity
Yeah,
index,
yeah,
or
and
is that
again, not a formal theory, just a
CI?
pseudo theory, like,
No, no,
but
yeah,
it sure does
yeah.
make a lot of sense.
Yeah. You know what's funny is in you doing that, you are doing that thing that he talked about, which is sense making or symbolic language is co-evolving. Literally, this chat GPT gave you the CCI thing, and you're like, oh, okay, it's new symbolic language. And that fed back into you to improve your intelligence
Yeah,
to then interrogate it more, the artificial intelligence with that new language. Um, Literally, it's exemplified
yeah.
right there. It's
Cool.
that's man. It's so meta. It's so meta. It's mirrors all the way down. Or now I'm thinking it's cows. We're all cows.
Yeah, and I think exactly what you described is, like, the why now of epistemic me. Like, I think consciousness
Yeah.
was too complex to, like, really quantify before AI, before large language models. And now we have a chance to kind of, like, look at all this data of agency and consciousness through this lens, and that's why we need self models. That's why we need subjectivity in ways to it can be expressed through language, so that AI can help us, like, really understand
Yeah.
the theories of consciousness and subjectivity.
You know how I'm thinking about this? What pops in my head is like, obviously, as me and you talk about this, we're deep in these domains and we love nerding out about them, and so we get each other. Um, there's not many people that I could talk at this
Yeah.
level with about this. So basically, we got to go find more. That's one of our prerogatives. Um, but one of the other things is we as a team have an opportunity to educate the masses on
Mhm.
this problem, on this opportunity. And so far, one of our biggest things that we've learned is validation that our copy around positioning of how will AI understand us if we don't fully understand ourselves. People latched onto that question really well. Um, that's been a great thing we validated in market. And the reverse actually hits too, which is if we don't fully understand ourselves, then how can AI possibly ever understand us? We have a variation of this on our website, and I've like tested out variations of that. But basically, those two questions are how we've been explaining this in market without like a demo to show. Um, but a fun thing I just thought about in my head was I always think about Brian Chesky's like Pixar, imagine the 10-star experience, and then work backwards to like what you can actually do. But like you should imagine that. And so I'm actually imagining, in yesterday's, when we did a pod yesterday, we were talking about, oh, what if we had a gamified, here's the human anatomy, here's a heat map. We modeled everything in your body, all the biomarkers, we get all this data in real time. And then you could see this heat map as a patient with your doctor or with your fitness coach or longevity coach or doctor or whatever. And now I'm thinking of this to explain it to the science community because there's in this lecture, right? It showed me there's a large amount of people that are at our level of thinking like this is the thing to talk about. And so I think if we just posed our simple questions, people would get it just watching that lecture. But then if we go outside to like my mom, like she's like, Vietnamese immigrant lady, she's just worried about putting food on the table or like my brother and just and being a caregiver for her sister. And so she's like got immediate things to think about. And so to crack that is like really leaping from innovator to early adopter to early majority to squarely like late laggards, I would say, like the last one. So I had this thought in my head, which is maybe we have a video that shows like once we do this in 10 years or something, once we actually can for a population for health and longevity, we've mapped out everything to maximize metabolic health for the epistemic institution use case where their
Nice.
whole goal is for a subpopulation to keep them alive. Let's say we do that. And something I think that would be so cool is we show and I got this idea from Benjamin's presentation where in his institute they combine design with research. So the research is presented in this super sexy, cool way that actually provokes awareness, and then people are hooked in. They read the research, and I thought that was wonderful, and then that makes a lot of sense for our thing because our thing is very much on the uh, abstract
Mhm.
thinking side. Let's say we ground it very easily with AI health coach. I think that's why it's a good use case for us. But like abstractly thinking, we're in this world, we've made sense and have created models ourselves, have billions of them for this 500K population or whatever. And what we could do, I'm imagining we go to the World Health Organization or the UN. We're like, here's a sick video that shows uh, I'm imagining in my head pictures, images of like people, and then zoomed in on one, that anatomy of a person. Maybe it's a woman, a man, maybe two, and then it has all these like things of like, oh, we have this data, it's version, it's in real time, resting heart rate variability, um, things around your cortisol levels, just everything about you, everything we can measure. And then we zoom out a little bit, and then we see a giant population of that on a globe, and it's like here in a continent or something, and it's like, cool, we've lit that up, it's now lit up, we have all this data. um, and then it shows some sort of existential risk score that says, oh, the risk of this is this, what's the next question to answer to drive that down. um, and then it kind of ends with this fog of war across everywhere else that we haven't mapped this out. And there's this promise of, if we do map it all out, if we clear out the fog of war, it's not just this like little blue continent or zone that we've lit up with data, it's everywhere. And then I'm imagining the video expands to the universe, the galaxies, like the stars and shit. And it just keeps lighting up in this uh, like visual way with the same color scheme in my head to demonstrate the idea that the story of this is, we're trying to measure in every way possible anything we can possibly measure to make sense of, to protect itself from
Yeah.
not dying. Like, um, anyway, so that was in my head of like, what can I show my mom that would be like, this is what we're doing, and then she sees it, she gets it, and she's like, oh, this is really important. This is like humanity saving level important. That's the sense that we want to give people. So thanks for sticking with me through that. I had this whole thing in my head. I wanted to get out from what you were saying. Do you have anything to add to that? I was sort of imagining that as the 10-star education
Oh,
experience.
this is really cool. It's a similar kind of like goal in mind when I made that longevity radar, risk radar, and I just thought
Yeah,
like but you're taking it to like the nth level, right, where you can see, yeah,
10-star level. Yeah,
because you want to show some correlation between like, here's the thing we can measure in the body, and here's how it relates to your risk, you know, uh, of cancer or heart disease or
yeah,
anything that's like existential threat. Um, and then they kind of go like, there's different, they happen, there's their cognition, and like say getting something like Alzheimer's disease, like it's a kind of like game
yeah,
over, but you got but then you have things happening like epigenetic cell drift in your stem cells, which takes, we don't really have to worry about dying from that until we're 150 years old. Um, so like,
yeah,
like
yeah.
which one
True.
are you going to pay attention to first? But then if we're looking at this and we're trying to like
Yeah,
really get people to phenomenologically feel that like they're in a population of people that are all experiencing these things at once, and you're going to like visualize that and like spotlight it like you talked about.
yeah,
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 that's really powerful vision.
yeah. I'm gonna try to make this shit in Sora. Like, what, we can make this now. Yeah, I'm gonna try to get AI to make this, and then you know what's gonna do? It's gonna give me new language in a video that I will increase my intelligence on, and then
Right.
make more sense of it, and then make the AI make more shit. It smears all the way down, Jonathan. It smears all the way down. It's a quick time check. So we've been going for a while on this. I actually totally think we could have Dean watch that video. He would love it, and then we do another one just on this and go a little bit deeper with more prepared questions next time. This is thoroughly enjoyable to talk about, and also we just came up with a deliverable on my plate, which is good or bad, but like I'd say it's good overall. It's more work, but I definitely see something like that would bridge the education gap with the laggard late majority persona for us. Like it's harder to explain to somebody like my mom, but if she watched something and it was told in this very narrative way that provoked human emotional connection, then I think it would draw her into the story more. um, like everybody can relate to health, right? Like she's very interested in health at this point in her life too. Like she's having some back issues. Her sister has breast cancer. So she's coming to a reckoning with that. And so if we start at the health level, everybody can empathize with that. Nobody wants to die, be unhealthy. And then we zoom out to the nation continent level, and show that fog of war part. The fog of war part, I'm really thinking about, like, now I'm imagining uh, kind of like figures of people, but you can't really see them, they're under this fog, and there's question
Hmm.
marks above them. And I think actually right now at this time, even my mom, like, she's not really questioning what's going to happen to all of us, but I think it's an undercurrent, even for the laggards, late majority. this also reminds me from the video. He talks about the 5 stages of grief with AI, and when he put it on there, right, he's like, what, anger, bargaining, acceptance, hope, like all those. And I was like, oh yeah, I see people in my circle in each of these stages of grief of getting to hope of, oh, AI. But like there's people that are
Right.
totally denial, totally like bargaining, well, like maybe it won't take these skills. And then there's like the me and you where it's like, well, Replit just came out, it's taking every skill, bro. And so we were squarely in the, all right, we accept it, we got to hope about a better future. But so sorry, just to finish the thought, I think appealing to that emotion of confusion and I don't know what's going on, like the undercurrent there, I think that could get at the late majority laggard. I'll play around with that.
Yeah.
um do you want to go into actually, do you have any additions to what I just said, and then we could talk about roadmap
Well, just to wrap
prioritization?
that fog of war idea into like the gamification of health, like we talk about with the Don't Die community, and like because I
Yeah.
think what you're picturing drawing out is actually where like a heavily gamified experience can bring you into these little nuances of your being. Because I think about it all the time, like
Yeah.
how can you get people to like really just phenomenologically relate to consciousness and how it impacts their life and understand one another and invest in cognitive energy and understanding. And I think have you ever played
Yeah.
these games where you're in a habit loop, right? And then all of a sudden they like
Yeah.
there's like some kind of like paywall gate, and you're like, why am I about to pay five
Yeah.
dollars to like do this stupid little thing in this
Yeah.
game that's not even part of the core? They've got me like
Mhm.
they've got me like 3 loops deep into the game, right? Where
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's where I think like when I go to the gym, like the exercise that I just did, I know that I'm producing BDNF to nourish my neurons when I sleep tonight, right? And that's me like
Mhm.
4 or 5 levels
Yeah.
down in the game of exercise, where I'm just like
Yeah.
thinking about things that I had no idea had to do with exercise when I started. Um, and so
Yeah.
I think that like
Yeah.
that territory you described where there's a fog of war and we want people in, I think that's also the space they're exploring in a heavily gamified game of Don't Die. Um,
You're
yeah.
totally right. Yeah. I mean, you're totally right, especially in America right now with the whole make America healthy again. It's like nobody knows how, like everybody knows conceptually at a high level. And this goes into all of our hypotheses that are becoming more strong over time. It's the uncertainty, right? Like we're using the word confusion right now, but I was using, when I shipped my newsletter, I had the synthesis of like uncertainty across the personas we're tackling. And it's the same thing like with my mom, there's uncertainty. It's just not as apparent, so it's almost education to get you to even think, oh, there's more and I want to learn more. And then you're on a propelled loop to go levels deeper on your own.
Yeah.
So I think you're totally right that this could be gamified. Um, and yeah, now we're participating in it to make it even more gamified with Don't Die, which is
Right.
really fun. So it's so fun. Like we kind of manifested this. Man. Yeah, I was editing the pod where I kind of told that story of like the pitch and stuff like that, and just watching again, and I was like, wow, like we really did
Yeah.
manifest this. It's really cool. Now we get to work on these problems we really want to solve and be thinking about. Anything else on that with the fog of war before wrapping up and moving into the roadmap and what we want to prioritize for next week in particular?
No, all good here. Um, the general problem of like
Cool.
getting people interested in this idea of consciousness, subjectivity behind epistemic me. I think it's an ongoing conversation. There's like a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, one thing I ground on is like we should be thinking about people like my mom. Like it's good to put thought cycles, but it's also even more important to just focus on the first 100
Hmm.
true fans or whatever, right? Because those are the people that are going to have outsized network effects, built high trust in their networks, could go champion the cause for us if we make them happy. So I think it's good to think about the future, which it's good to get ahead of things. Like I think playing around with that video will be good. But if we just knock out of the park with 100 true fans, I think we'll
Yeah,
eventually get there.
cool. I like that.
Cool. So let me share my screen. Let me know when you could see it. So for other people, this is the Epistemic Me Team Hub. You're kind of seeing behind the scenes here. And typically, this is a little bit of a mess. I think everybody's product space is a mess. Here is kind of our product space. Here's where we have like use cases. This AI Brian. Here is me testing out some things. Here's our ideal customer profile stuff. And then in particular here is where we're keeping a backlog for soft partnership. So Epistemic Me SDK requirements to enable Brian AI. So I don't know if you got a chance to go through this. I put in everything in our backlog that we had uh, gotten together. I think that we had gotten together about a week and a half ago. I haven't added some of these new items. So maybe we could, how about we do this? Let me link you this. And then could you just scan it as I'm scanning it on your own right now and just be like, is there anything missing? And then let's add that. I'm going to send this to you on Slack. Hold up. Cool. So how we do that first? We'll just scan through. Is anything missing from, so there's coach designer, there's dialectic designer. Actually, could you get me that Excalidraw or slash, you should have edit access. So how about we add the Excalidraw to this? I'll make a little.
Cool. Let me do that.
Perfect. Change this one to be H2.
So do you want the roadmap on one and then not the dialectic designer on another?
Let's put everything under this guy, this header, Epistemic Me partnership roadmap for now, just so we have it in one place, so I could see between the Excalidraw that we demoed to them, along with the Belief Mirror app, and I want to just make sure that it is tied to our
Cool. Does that
backlog.
look good?
It is loading on my end. Yeah,
Nice.
cool, perfect, cool. So dialectic designer, this experimental loop, perspective selves,
So I guess
AI coach.
the and I'm just trying to picture the best demo and getting from where I'm at now to like something I think I can demo about a week from now.
Yeah,
And I could start on like I could start just building the UI for this as like a Next.js application. Um, or I could focus more on the trainer that I'm working on right now and show the outputs that it gives so that we can have a conversation about like how the outputs can be used in a coaching application, like for question and answer
yeah.
technique.
So let's talk about that. So how much effort would it be for focusing on the UI for a V1 versus like getting this up and then maybe it doesn't even work, like we just mock or
Hmm.
stub out data. Um, how much effort do you think that would be? Like if we ranked it on our little
I
backlog.
mean,
Let's just type that in actually.
yeah, like the tools we're using now, like taking that mockup, fleshing out a little bit, put it into V0 for a Next.js scaffold. Um, you know, I could have something really nice in like 4 hours. And but the thing
Okay.
is that it would be demonstrate this UI, but it doesn't quite answer the question of like how is my AI coach going to work and how's it going to like respond and interact with users. And that's the thing I'm thinking is more like the critical path.
Yeah, if we level up, like the biggest hypothesis that we have a lot of confidence on is that we want to resolve uncertainty. If they release this into the wild, they need to know that it will be 100% Brian, that every single interaction they have control over, and there's a certainty in that it will personalize value and it will not uh, undermine their brand credibility. So I'd say, like, just from that product lens, we should index towards any feature that really just maps to alleviating uncertainty is probably the highest value feature right now. If we think about what Greg asked us, and we have the otter, but the singular thing, and I'm thinking about Greg a lot right now because he's got to implement this guy, right? Everybody else is like, you know, there are other decision makers, but if he sees that it's easy, he could produce value very quickly, which we want to get to. So Greg asked, how do we make sure it's not hallucinating? So that totally told me that's where his mind is at, and we should meet him where he's at. So give him a certainty. Let me just write this out, and then we'll map it
Yeah.
in the Rice framework. So there's two that we're gonna add. But as I do this, does that make sense? Kind of where my head's at with overall prioritization, but we could run it through the framework with that lens.
Yeah, I think I'm wanting to picture that the specifics of what it means to reduce that risk. Um,
Yeah. Take mock-up of dialect. Okay. As a developer, I can web application with a nice UI to easily define archetypes of my user base, perspective selves to use in the dialectic, and a learning objective to ultimately feel confident about a given dialectic I've simulated so that I can then release it into the wild with my
as an experiment.
health coach. Okay. Uh,
Because you get to collect more data and feed it back in to the trainer. Yeah.
yeah, I think to real users and form a great feedback loop to my training data. Okay, that's decent. And then we basically said this is about 4 hours. So I have $5 signs here, and I actually haven't normalized this. So I want to talk to you about that, and then we can just write a rule for that. And anytime we prioritize, we think about that. What's your perspective on like estimates? Since we're at a biweekly sprint cycle, I think we should maybe say like, I don't know, 5 is one sprint, or maybe 3 is one sprint, and that could be the
Okay.
benchmark.
Uh, yeah. I mean,
Maybe 3, and
a
then
lo-
5
a lot
moves
of the
like
stuff I've
increments.
delivered historically has taken me more than one sprint cycle, just because
Oh, okay. So then maybe what would be easy here? So two, I mean, we could just like take 2 weeks divided by 5. We could put something else here that isn't a $sign either to get more granular. Um,
yeah, it's fine if it like. How about $5 is more than one
okay, I
sprint?
got one. Okay, let's say like because 2 weeks, let's say in a normal working cycle, that's like 10 days or
Mm,
whatever of business days. So this is nice. Like one of these is like 2 days.
okay,
I mean, more accurately would be at the hourly level, but we're bootstrapped, so like our hours kind of change. So I don't want to get too anal
dude,
about
I've
that,
literally spent like 2 hours in meetings just having this conversation about how effort is ranked with sprint. You know,
What'd you all come to?
well, do you ever use Pivotal Tracker? I think the exponential effort is like more representative of how things scale with complexity. Um, but how about we just say
Okay.
$5 is more than one sprint, and then like less than $4 is linear
Yeah.
within the sprint. So $4 is like one sprint cycle.
Yeah. Prioritization effort. $5 Yeah. Signs. Oh, okay. Is more than one sprint. Less than 4 is linear within a sprint. Cool. Okay, great. So a dialectic designer sounded like maybe that was $1 sign or $2 signs then, just to get the interactive UI up in a Next.js with some stubs.
Yeah, I think so. It's the
Okay,
trainer
let's
I'm
put
on right now, and once that's built, the UI for it.
is that the training
Yeah,
harness?
the
Training harness.
the dialectic training harness.
What would the user story for this be? Would it be like, as a developer, I could leverage an out of the box training harness to speed up my simulations?
Um, as another, I can how how about because the output of it is a set of like a question answer tree.
Tree.
Yeah,
Okay.
that might not be the best word for it, but like something concrete like that is that you can put example users in and you get out like list of questions to ask them that you can feed into your AI coach.
Or question answer trees on a particular. Is it accurate to say on a particular learning
Yes.
objective? Specified. Is there a specified learning objective so that I can save time and be confident in the dialectics that I experiment with and promote to production to real users? I think
Yeah.
this sounds good.
Yeah.
How does it sound? Okay, cool. Acceptance criteria. You want to run through that real fast? Do we have that somewhere? We might have that in Slack.
Yeah. I think just that you can input a learning objective, um, use reinforcement learning to reward the most valuable questions that progress towards the learning objective, and then curate the rewards manually.
Output of optimized uh, optimized question and answer trees for the specified. Great. Okay. I have another MVP column. This is clearly MVP. Let me just put that. And MVP to me is like Greg has used it and he has 100 private beta users on it. Like that's like pretty MVP. That's my working mental model of MVP.
Yeah. So this will be an example app, and I don't know if it's just like it'll be a Python implementation. Um, and so
Yeah.
like people could download it and use it, or they could just like use it as an example and build their own thing. You know, yeah,
And then
either way.
extend it. Yeah.
But I think it should be like baked enough, that you could do it. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is a must have and performance benefit. Okay. So I've been, reach is like, how much reach do we get if we implement this? AKA, how many users would use it
Mhm.
if we implement it for our use case? That's how I'm thinking about reach. So of our hypothesized ICP market, do we believe with what confidence this would reach everybody versus nobody? And nobody or very like one user niche, I'm just putting
Yeah, I
1%.
think it's interesting to anybody
Um,
building a coach, an AI health coach, or any
yeah,
AI coach.
that's and I think this would be high impact. Feel pretty confident about it. And how much more effort to take this through the acceptance criteria
Let's
we
make it
can
a
find?
3, so like a little bit more than half a
Okay.
sprint.
Okay.
If I get
Cool.
lucky, it'll be less, but.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's one of the key questions on my mind is like
Yeah.
um, what's most empowering to the AI coach developer from the output of that training? Is it like for instance, if you're building a coach one way, you could have just like constrained questions, like a multiple choice questions, for instance. That's like
Yeah.
the most constrained thing is like, here's a question, here's some multiple choice answers, and then like unconstrained is like here's some questions that will lightly like fine tune an LLM, and then it can just ask whatever questions it wants,
Yeah.
based on those inputs. Um, so like, I guess my
Okay.
yeah, is it most useful to have like here's like a Monte Carlo question answer tree that is heavily constrained, or is it more like here's just like a fine tuning technique that you can use to then test out like a very broadly answering LLM agent?
And then part of this, just for me to envision the user experience. So Greg sees this training harness. He uh, makes a copy of it on local, and now there's this in front of him. He could either just give the learning objective, and then it is this broad LLM agent model where it makes sense of that, and then it creates the experiment, the dialectics, the questions, answers, simulates it, and then provides here's a bunch of things we tested. Cool, Greg, take a look. Let me know what you want to do. Versus the other one would be Greg goes in and he's already thinking, well, there's certain questions we want to ask or a certain type of way we want to ask things. And I want to input that. Then I want to run the experiment. Um, is that, or are those the two paths in front of us?
I think of it, it's like more like what is the actual AI coaching experience going to be like? Is it just something that you can ask Brian anything? In the more constrained example, I'm thinking like he's gonna identify that a user needs to answer a certain set of questions, and like they have to like sort of provide answers for all of those before they can get to the next set of questions or something like that. And then I think like there's a lot of precedent, like the product you're talking about, Rasa, last time. Yeah, and I used one called Landbot in the past, and so on Landbot, like I would just string together like multiple choice questions, like one after another, and like that was fine to collect the information from the user. So just what's most useful right now is one thing I'm trying to hit like how can we make this for people that really know how to build an AI coach? How can we make it useful? Maybe like, provide a set of evaluations across a question asked tree.
I think at the heart of this are two questions from my perspective. One is, do people building AI agents or chatbots today with the existing models or workflows of here's a very constrained experience, you have to map together the multiple choice questions and stuff like that. Do they like that experience? Like, did you like that experience?
It was like better than a form. So we had like one experience that was a type form, and then one experience that was a Landbot, and people just like some people would prefer one over the other, and so we just had both available.
Okay, so then the other question is, Greg's immediate experience would inform that question. Like, how from a development experience do I like this to implement it to be useful? And then
Mhm.
there's the bigger question that I think you're asking, which is which path technically gets us the best value for the end user. Keeping in mind, Brian would kind of be like his thoughts on this would matter a lot too. Like one use case I'm using to stretch this is, what if somebody said, "Hey, Brian, I want to commit suicide. What do I do?" Like, what does the agent say? What do we allow them to say? Um, and that's a question like I think the Don't Die team would need to help us understand, which I think would drive a little bit of the philosophy here in my mind.
This new paradigm of chat gpt is just like it, like Brian's probably looking for something like that, but it's just like him. And then
Yeah.
it comes with all
Yeah.
the guardrails of chat gpt also, and like that kind of thing.
Yeah. So then I guess because that's where my head's going
Mhm.
is you want it to be a free form experience. If we index on, I want to gather as much belief data from you as possible, right? And so like I was kind of imagining the chat GPT experience, but with like the belief mirror sort of integrated, and then obviously health focus and it's Brian. So then I guess that begs the question, how does ChatGPT do its rules? Is it like a pretty basic rules engine where it's just data labeling tied to a rules engine that they maintain centrally?
Well, I think in our case, we're kind of like at the GPT layer, where like yeah, like we'd fine tune it by creating a GPT like as a set of questions that here's what AI Brian Coach would ask. Like, please use these questions first when trying to understand the user, and then extrapolate to ask the next best question if it's not available.
Okay, so let's take that suicide use case. Let's say Brian's team is like, we want to give a very typical kind of response for that use case. And the reason this is top of mind is actually there was a community member that posted that they're thinking about suicide, and then somebody else pinged me and was like, "Hey, what should we do about this?" And I was like, "Oh shit, I should screenshot this, send it to Greg." And now he's kind of thinking about like, how do we handle this use case? I suggested good stopgap is have something that detects that and then auto post suicide hotline resources, nationwide resources, like for that problem for
Yeah,
that persona to meet them where they're at. But also, it would be good to vet with an independent organization that is focused on this problem. We're sort of brainstorming here, but that basically tells me, okay, if we're living at the GPT layer for that use case, which stretches us a lot, like this is a very extreme niche use case, but I find it useful as a way to kind of min-max or stress test are thinking to drive direction of this is I would imagine that Brian would probably want some level of control over that. And so his developer would probably want some way to easily put in, hey, if it's topics of this type, we have a canned response, and they want to know that that gets to 100%. So backing up from there, let's assume that is the case. That seems reasonable to me based on the interaction I had with Greg about that particular use case in the wild, not them asking a coach, but them just posing it to the community. Then does any direction we're going here with user constrained versus broad LLM agent, does any direction constrain that like requirement?
No, I'm thinking about, you know how the CCP did this with the DeepSeek service?
Yeah.
Like they have a parallel LLM like monitoring all the results. Like you ask about Tiananmen Square, and like the secondary agent comes in and is like, so you could have like a secondary die agent, and if like something is higher on the die scale, it could intervene and be like, hey, we're hearing a lot of die from you right now.
I kind of like that direction, honestly. That as we noodle through it, that seems the best to me at a gut level. Because that allows for control, but it's also
Yeah,
flexible, you know. So,
but
and then from a user experience perspective, the developer wouldn't have to maintain all these like rules in like a typical rules engine. It would just be an LLM with kind of a fine-tuned prompt set and some content data.
right, like, and honestly, I don't know how additive we can be to that unless it's really like unless we can articulate it as a philosophical divide. Where like the philosophy described is one of don't die, and then like we can actually like auto identify things that are anti the philosophy, on a scale. But I'm just more thinking about like the utility that we can provide. I'd rather think about these edge cases later because I know we can just overlay a safety layer on top of whatever we do. Yeah, guardrails.
So I think actually what's going to help us the most is if we just get this down into a Slack message and I just shoot off to Greg,
Uh,
and then he just tells us because he's been very open in dialogue with us. So I think he's really open and just literally just giving us the priority at this point in the relationship building. So how about we do
well,
that with this particular one to give you direction?
can we propose like this is what we were thinking? We'll be working on this, and let us know if you have any thoughts because I think it's something because of the state of the world today. It's like sort of obvious, like okay, ChatGPT found product market fit. Now Claude is copying it. Now DeepSeek is copying it, and that's the form of AI coach that everybody wants. Like that's like Greg shouldn't need to tell us that. We should know that, I guess. So then I think what we're describing is here's how we're thinking about enabling you to program a ChatGPT like AI Brian coach. Let us know if this sounds about right. Um, and that's where I would describe like, here's one option where we could provide a prompt of the question exploration space. Here's another option where we can provide the embeddings in evaluations for the question answer evaluation space.
When you say embeddings, could you explain that a little bit more? What does that actually look like?
Well, just like if we're going to encode a question answer pair as in like a vector database, then
Oh,
it's like
I see.
specifically encoded with the embeddings of the LLM where it's going to be trained on, and then you can sort of like so you can have that question answer pair as an embedding with an evaluation score, and you can like use that as a priority queue for how the bot would ask like query and ask questions. And a lot of this I'm just asking for time to like let's think this through, and I want bounce some ideas around because it just
Yeah,
you know
yeah. Looking at this, does this change the scope any meaningful way, going either way, or is it just more of a I just need to know which one would be the most valuable? Doesn't change scope.
it just like the specific output that I have, like I'll tell you my tendency right now is to go and learn the machine learning best practices for building question answer bots and then like follow those heuristics, and I think that's going to guide me towards like formal question answer evaluations. and there's probably some things I need to learn that I don't know yet. So that's like the feeling that I have. And if if you were to say like, no, like let's just generate a prompt with like some questions and it's like see how it performs. I don't think it fully addresses like the concern of will it hallucinate or not, but it's something and it's quicker.
Yeah. And how, I guess another question I have to make a decision is if we go that path and next meeting, they're like, I want to do this user provided embeddings. I want more control. I want this to be in a more typical machine learning chatbot
Yeah.
workflow. Then how would we have technical debt accumulation is, I guess, is what I'm saying. Like, would it be a lot to change direction at that point if we go with the broad, here's a prompt, and then next meeting they're like, actually, I want to see this develop more.
No, I think it's more maybe a question of first touch. Like, what do we bring to the table? I think they might be looking for us to say like, this is the best way to build it, and they may not know to like ask for additional things if we provide like a prompt technique that doesn't really work that well. Um, and like,
I'm thinking Brian being a philosophically minded dude, like he sees himself as a philosopher. When I said dialectic to him, he like understood, and um, he talked about the don't die dinners as a series of dialectics. So I think at some point he would probably like want to see this, and I also think that he would have a mind for optimizing dialectics. So one question I have is like, could we go the fast route for now and just like seed it based on our extracted belief systems from his
mhm,
content? Like give this LLM that perspective and just feed that and just say, hey, it's V1, this is what we did. What do you think? Um, because it kind of fits into the model of, okay, Brian's going to be making new content all the time. Um, this way is less bottlenecked. This way is more bottlenecked. This is my gut feel at a high level. And I think it brings us a little bit closer to just evolving towards the overall vision. I'm kind of a fan of us riffing through this, of just going with that, take perspective self of Brian, generate these. That's the demo. And then if we can have time, get it working in Dialectic Designer, if it will only take 4 hours. Well, I guess it's 4 hours, you mentioned, if it's not like actually hooked up to the data, it's just stubbed out. But yeah, that would be my order, is try to get this done. Go with the perspective
okay,
self, Brian, this route. Dialectic Designer next, whatever you can get done of that, and then hook it up after that if you can.
okay, yeah, I think that's really helpful. That makes sense. Because I would, so I would just like I would focus on like populating Brian's like the self model for Brian with his belief system based on documents, and then use that belief system as context to ask the next best question. So that what this trainer is going to be doing is going to be saying, uh, Brian Johnson wants to learn about this user, and it's going to be simulating that interaction, and it's going to be promoting the next best question that Brian Johnson would ask in a given conversation.
I think that will get their light bulbs turned on for sure. And then from there, we can go into the more technical specifics and provide them our thinking on
Mm-hmm.
the decision, like what we just talked about, and then ask them like, here's the rest of the stuff we got to build for you. Are you good with this for MVP? And then we improve this part over time to give you a bit more control for the provided embeddings or user specified embeddings, um, as we work on these other items in the roadmap. Like I'm thinking the next meeting, we show progress, and then do another facilitated brainstorm of where I really like this product exercise where I give them like $100, and it's like, you have constrained capital, pick these features, and then that just gets it to really good loop where we're just like, we know exactly what you want next. So that was my plan for this next meeting with them. We show a bit of value. We show them what's on the backlog based on the first roadmap conversation we had with them. They'll have that context in their information architecture and mental model. We give them some play money, kind of like we did last time, and it's just the Canva slides, get them working in there on a shared artifact, and actually just have them rank it for us.
Cool. Yeah. Um, okay. So for the demo in the
Cool.
meeting, would
Yeah.
like so I'll like run the trainer with Brian in the loop and like show the question answer output in a way that like can all comprehend. And then it would be, I don't know if you want to, this would be good use of time, but I think like if we acted like the user and then we asked Brian a question and saw the response come back and like just did that together, yeah, I think
Oh
that would be
yeah.
like the best demo.
Okay. So yeah, I think this is good direction. We'll obviously keep posted over the weekend asynchronously, and then next Wednesday we'll prep for a demo. And I think this is good direction. I mean, this is like the first real like super backlog prioritization we've had, right? It's fun to be in this cycle, like we slacked about, right? Um, I really want to spend a lot of my free cycles in the developer experience as if I were Greg, as if I were going to ship apps on top, because then I think that will help inform the greatest priorities, right? Like, or I will be able to speak to that experience a lot better. So now that we actually have like, okay, cool, we have stock partnership, great. I see this is on the path. This is prioritizing our use cases. Then I could just funnel all my time to this, and I'm working on streamlining all the content stuff, so it takes me less time. I think the podcast editing is the thing that's killing me the most right now. So once I streamline that, then I'll just free up more cycles for the next kind of big important things. Um, I did want to share with you. I had a great conversation earlier with Juan Carlos, I think, from the Sidebar community. He is CPO at some mental health company, but on the side,
Oh,
he's
cool.
like bootstrapping an app. He was really interested in mental models. He's very obsessed with it, and so obviously we nerded out about that a lot. And he was like, "Wait, like, what's your app? I'm curious." And so that was just something cool to share. I had another good conversation. I saw you had a couple good conversations too. What were those about from your stand up yesterday, or I think it was yesterday?
Did I tell you that Melissa works at True Diagnostics? So she's really like, she can be like a really key informant and contact. Um, let's see. I heard back from this woman, Courtney, that we went on the Don't Die hike with, and she had the psychologist and the mental models for matchmaking. Um, she finally got back to me on those. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't remember what other conversations I mentioned in stand up. Let me check it out.
It was just that the Victor and
Okay.
yeah. So that was yesterday. We didn't. I don't think we debriefed about that. Anything there?
It was like Victor has this habit of like putting stuff on my calendar without telling me. Like, and so I woke up. I woke up after the meeting started, and I'm like, "Oh, hey, dude, you guys still there?" So we only have 15 minutes, but he's been he's been like building Melissa up to me and building me up to Melissa, and so we just met. And one takeaway I think that Melissa mentioned that stood with me was like, she's like, "I'm so impressed that you're working with Brian. He's got such a high bar for who he works with," um, and so it really made me think that like you know, we've done all the right things to get in position, but like I think we should like just over deliver, you know, in the sense of like expect that we'll like expect that we're like sort of applying for a very important job or something like that with the quality of work we deliver. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I'm treating it. And that's also why I'm like so much trying to help them too.
Yeah.
Because just my whole thinking is like, just keep delivering them value without asking for anything in return. And at some point, it'll be so much value that whatever we ask for, it'll be like, oh yeah, come on the pod, give us a shout out, help us get more contributors, maybe fund this slash intro us to Andrew Huberman once your AI is up and you're happy with it. Like we should be treating every sprint cycle as like we're fighting for life.
Right.
That's how I think about it. So yeah, let's keep keeping each other accountable to like towing the line of perfectionism with these deliveries. Yeah. And honestly, it literally I think it comes down to just me and you talking more about the focused use cases and then doing the thought experiments of being in the user's shoes. And then me with my relationship with Greg, I could just actually take these thoughts, go to him, get kind of inside feedback loop. You know what's been good is like I asked Greg like, so are users going to own their own data in the future with health? And he just literally told me, yeah. And I'm like, that helps us so much to understand where you guys see value and where you're going.
Yeah.
And I was just like, bro, I literally just asked this and boom, roadmap revealed.
And so
It's so funny.
yeah. And it's funny to see all the people who meet this app experience and don't die and kind of being on the inside of it. Because there was a guy who was like, are you guys going to start like advertising soon? I just can't imagine this. All this valuable information is going to be free." And Greg responded like almost right away saying like, well, we're going to have a paid version with an AI coach and comma and others, like other stuff he mentioned. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's funny. And then now they want me to like PM Don't Die. Like,
Yeah.
I gotta wrap up that thread with Greg, but I think you know how I don't know. I basically kind of demonstrated, I definitely know my shit with product. In all of our interactions, I think I demonstrated
Yeah.
that. And then on our last call with them, when we debriefed, Dean said this best. He was like, "We clearly have thought about this way more than they
Yeah.
have." And that was so fucking clear. And so I think they might see that and they're like, wait, these guys know where the value is. Like, let's kind of bring that in. Um, so, but back to what you said. Yeah, I think Brian does have a really high bar, and yeah, it's a testament that we made it, but we got to keep earning it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good philosophy. Got to not don't let the partnership die.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let me wrap the pod. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
Well, the just Dean's updates, like that's really exciting. That he's kind of passed code yellow, and so this him looking at his own personal health data is going to be a big deal. Like he's just so adept. He'll be able to figure out like what we can pull in from like say an Apple Health protocol or something like that, and that's gonna be really cool.
Dude, I'm pretty stoked about that. And Dean seems stoked too, which gets me stoked.
Yeah,
And he's taking care of his health, which I think will free up more capacity for him, honestly. Like when your battery's low, you just got low capacity at the end of the day. So once he takes care of his batteries, I think he's going to have a lot more energy. Yeah, I was excited to see that and see that he's just working on his health. And then he said he's going to share a prototype with us on Sunday. That might be also interesting to incorporate into the demo, depending on the fidelity of that. So
oh, are you available on Sunday?
he said work towards sharing a prototype Sunday on my findings for the causal debugging system for his health.
Oh, okay. Asynchronously, because I thought you were unavailable to meet on Sunday.
I'll probably
Yeah.
just text you
Okay.
guys. But yeah, asynchronously if you guys could.
Cool. Yeah, that's all good.
Um, cool. Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining us while we riffed about, uh, evolution of technology, sense making, intelligence, models of self, agents in the world, everything, how we're cows now, its mirrors all the way down, and literally going through our backlog refinement together and talking through a use case for the Don't Die team and Brian AI. So thanks a lot for joining us as we build in public. This has been the ABCs for Building the Future podcast, and we hope you had a great time. Click subscribe if you want to hear more from us, and go to our website if you want to join the community. Have a wonderful day.